Really appreciate it. If you haven't gotten a piece of pizza or something to drink, please do so now. We're going to start. This is the inaugural speaker of the 2011-2012 Sabin Prize Environmental Venture Speaker Series. My name is Stuart DeCue. I'm the program director at the Yale Center for Business and the Environment, which runs the series over the course of the year. We're really privileged today to have our first speaker, Patrick von Bargen, who is, for those of you from the School of Management, is from the first class that ever graduated from the School of Management in 1978. So has obviously an interesting perspective on how this place has grown and developed over the course of the last, few decades. To preface this talk, I'm just going to talk briefly about the Sabin Prize. Sabin Prize is a $25,000 winner-take-all environmental venture prize for a sustainable business. This is a competition that takes place over the course of the year for any student or faculty venture that focuses on addressing a global challenge of sustainability. And it's sponsored by the Andrew Sabin Family Foundation and administered by the Yale Center for Business and the Environment. This program has gone on, this is now its fourth year. All of the three previous ventures are still around in New Haven, going concerns, and are quite successful. So if anyone has an idea or something that they want to execute on, this is really a great opportunity for students at Yale. Also, backing that up, we have this fall, on October 17th, is the submission date for the Swobodka seed stage grants. So we're also offering $5,000 seed stage grants to student ventures to build up, to be able to get to the point where you can compete for that $25,000. So if you have an idea that's at a very early stage and you want to pull together a team and execute on that, this is the opportunity, and that is due on Monday, October 17th, the proposal. Finally, for entrepreneurs in the room, tonight the Entrepreneurship Club is hosting an ideation night, Samik, correct? And you guys are going to be doing that in Donaldson Commons, and that'll take place at 4 p.m. So this is an opportunity for everyone who's interested, who has an idea or is interested in participating in an idea, to get together to talk about how they can collaborate, how they can build the team, and move forward to apply to some of these sources of non-dilutive financing which we have at Yale, which really can help push your venture forward. Today's talk, just for everyone, is being recorded and webinared, and that's through Yale University, and then we'll be able to put it up both on the CBAE website and through the Yale University iTunes site. I'll get directly into the talk now. This is really exciting, I think, at the time period that we have, too, and very timely. The title of the talk, as many of you know, is Opening Solyndra's Box, Entrepreneurship and Energy, Where Does Energy Innovation and Deployment Policy Go for Here? And we're really privileged to have somebody who can speak about this from both the side of an entrepreneur, from a venture capitalist, and from someone who really knows the policy world back and forth. Just a bit about Patrick. He provides strategic counsel to a wide variety. He works for director of Quinn Gillespie Associates, and he provides strategic counsel to a wide variety of their energy clients, primarily in the clean technology space, including solar, wind, recycling, and biomass. He also represents startup firms using venture capital to develop clean energy technology. Patrick joined Quinn Gillespie in 2008 after having served in major public policy roles over 17 years in Washington, including Chief of Staff for Senator Jeff Bingaman from 1987 to 1999, and Managing Executive for Policy and Staff for Chairman William Donaldson of the Securities and Exchange Commission from 2003 to 2005. He also headed the National Commission on Entrepreneurship and served as the Vice President for the Council on Competitiveness, the only national organization whose membership is comprised exclusively of CEOs, university presidents, and labor leaders focused on American economic competitiveness issues. Patrick also has extensive expertise representing startup technology companies and venture capital firms, and served for 3 years as the CEO of the Center for Venture Education's Kauffman Fellows Program in Silicon Valley, the premier education and networking institute for new junior, senior venture capitalists around the world. Patrick has his BA from Stanford, his JD from Stanford, and of course, his MBA from Yale. So please join me in welcoming Patrick.
Stuart, I thank you for recrowning my qualifications. But actually, I think the reason I was invited to be the first speaker in this series goes a little like this, that Stuart and his committee went out for pizza and beer one night, and they said, well, who should we invite? And the conversation got going, and they said, well, let's let's get someone from Washington. I mean, it's such a dysfunctional mess down in Washington. Maybe there's someone who can explain it. And then after a few more pitchers of beer, they said, well, let's definitely get someone from the energy world, because after all, that's really emblematic. I think they could say that then during the beer, but emblematic of the real mess in Washington, because we haven't passed an energy bill in 4 years. The United States is the only industrial country that doesn't have an energy policy. This is really a sign of dysfunction. Maybe he can explain that. Then after a few more pitchers of beer, they said, wait a minute. Let's really get someone who lives off this dysfunction, someone who gets paid to live in this world. Let's get a lobbyist. So, voila, I am here. I am a lobbyist in energy in Washington. And I sort of have I sometimes say I have a scarlet L on my chest. I'm the kind of guy who you'll find in a basement of a church somewhere with about 12 other guys sitting around in a circle, and I sort of introduce myself by admitting my name is Patrick von Bargen and I'm a lobbyist. I'm really, Stuart, not that down on myself, although I sometimes apologize too much for who I am and what I do. But of course I'm a Democrat, so that happens a lot. If you had a Republican speak, he'd be here making you apologize for who you are and what you're doing. Especially since you're at Yale. Not quite as bad as Mitt Romney's Harvard faculty lounge, which he's been railing against, but bad enough. So, with that explanation for why you're listening to me today, let's talk a little bit about the title of my talk and what this is all about. So as Stuart mentioned, the title of the talk is Opening Solyndra's Box, Energy and Entrepreneurship and Where We Go From Here. I'm assume most of you know about Solyndra, and you probably know about Pandora's box, which Solyndra's box is a play on. But I am going to just sort of briefly explain that because as Stuart mentioned, I was chief of staff to a US senator from New Mexico, and we had one very beloved governor in the state who was a big, rich rancher from the middle of the state. And while he was governor, when he was pushed to do something by legislators or by constituency groups, and he didn't want to do it, he'd say, well, that could open a whole box of Pandoras. And so I sometimes feel the need to explain what happened with Pandora box myth. In the myth, the gods create this beautiful woman named Pandora, and as they do that, they give her a box, and they say, this beautiful box that we're giving you, you must promise never to open. Well, sure enough, we know how this ends. Her curiosity gets the better of her, and she opens the box, and all of the evils that plague the world escape from the box, and we have war, pestilence, hatred, disease, etc. And then she quickly tries to close the box, but all of the evils have now left the box. So when we think about opening Solyndra's box, which has occurred over the last month, what kind of evils have been released from that opening in the form of hearings and commentary on Capitol Hill? Well, those include allegations of inappropriate White House influence on decision makers within the DOE. Was it more than just sort of speeding up the process? What about political contributor influences? That is, we had investors in Solyndra who also gave to the Obama campaign. Is there a connection there? I should note just on the side there that it is impossible to find any issue in Washington of any importance where there isn't a contributor giving to somebody about that issue. But those allegations hang out there. And then you have the evil of hypocrisy, which is pretty rampant in Washington generally. But in this case, we have a situation where many of the members of the House of Representatives who are railing against the giving of the loan to Solyndra were also caught sending letters to the Secretary of Energy urging them to give loan guarantees to companies that would build facilities in their district. And then, of course, another evil would be the excessive risk-taking by bureaucrats in the Department of Energy, because they were so bedazzled by the prospect of new green jobs that they couldn't help themselves, and they made a bad decision. And then, of course, the perennial evil that is alleged is that the government is picking winners and losers. So we have all these evils unleashed by the Solyndra controversy. Does this mean that clean energy innovation is dead as a matter of policy in the United States? I think the first thing we need to do is sort of take a step back, sort of a sober step back here about what this is all about. First of all, let's talk about picking winners and losers. I don't know if all of you have seen this report by Nancy Fund and Ben Healy of SOM, where they basically looked at government subsidies of emerging energy industries in the United States, and they found, for example, that nuclear energy received $3.3 billion of subsidy from the federal government through their first 15 years, which represented about 1% of the entire federal budget. Oil and gas received $1.8 billion in today's dollars, or about 0.5% of the federal budget, for their first 15 years. And for solar and wind alone, for their first 15 years, they received $0.4 billion in subsidies, or about 0.1% of the federal budget. So we have a history of subsidizing new energy technologies, and it looks like nuclear and oil and gas were much more favored than renewables are today. And when you think about the picking winners and losers argument, in fact, there's the notion that one can avoid picking winners and losers if you are spending money, making grants, making tax credits available, making tax deductions available. Picking winners and losers is inevitable. Sometimes you do it on an industry level, sometimes you do it on a sector level, and sometimes you're forced, as in grants and in loan guarantees, to do it on a company-by-company level. But the government has to make choices under those scenarios, and of course there are inevitably winners and losers. What about we were too bedazzled by the prospect of green jobs in the economy that we made this unjudicious investment in Solyndra? Well, there's something to the notion that green jobs are worth pursuing. If you look at the solar industry, the solar industry in the United States now employs over 100,000 people, and that is double the number of solar workers in the United States than there were just 2 years ago. The industry grew by almost 70% in the past year alone. We had $6 billion worth of solar systems installed in the United States in the past year. So we're beginning to see in the solar industry, where Solyndra played, that in fact we are achieving significant economic growth indicators that are probably worth continuing to encourage. And then, as part of this sober step back, I want to focus on a report that was issued the same week that the first Solyndra hearing occurred. This report was put out by the American Energy Innovation Council of the Bipartisan Policy Center. There really is such a thing called the Bipartisan Policy Center. It's not an oxymoron in this case. And let me tell you who is on this council. So Norm Augustine, formerly CEO of Lockheed Martin, Ursula Burns, who's the CEO of Xerox, John Doerr, who is the leading partner at Kleiner Perkins, Caulfield & Byers, one of the premier venture firms in the country, Bill Gates, who doesn't need an introduction, Charles Holliday, chairman of Bank of America, Jeff Immelt of GE, and Tim Salso of Cummins, Inc., are part of this council, and they co-authored a report called Catalyzing American Ingenuity, the Role of government in energy innovation. And here's sort of what they write. So this is coming out the same week that Solyndra is being hosted on Capitol Hill. And they say, the time is now for even more and smarter federal investment in clean energy innovation, and failure to do so would almost certainly lead to a lower quality of life for most Americans. They go on to recognize the international competitive challenge in the clean energy space that they believe the US needs to step up to. And they say, with China and other trading competitors poised to build more energy infrastructure in the next 15 years than the US has built in the last 100, our nation faces a significant challenge in maintaining a place at the forefront of a multi-trillion-dollar effort to transform the world's energy systems and develop new high-value industries. That is a fairly significant economic challenge. And then when we look at the sort of specifics, let's say on China alone, China's production of solar for export grew from 2004 to 2010 at a compounded annual growth rate of 150%. Compounded annual growth rate of 150%. And then in March of this past year, they issued their 5-year plan for 2011 to 2015. And the goals they set are doubling installed wind capacity in China, quintupling installed solar capacity, and investing $1.5 trillion in new energy, new materials, and clean energy vehicles. Let's just take a moment. This is a bit of an aside, but it sort of focuses on that $1.5 trillion. So focus on the number 1.5. So while China is going to invest $1.5 trillion in clean energy innovation, consider that last week, the US House of Representatives vote to cut $1.5 billion, with a B, out of the Clean Energy Vehicle Program. There is a complete disconnect between China's view of the clean energy market and American policymakers, or at least some of them. So these prominent business leaders really seeing the potential for economic growth in the United States, the international economic challenge the country faces, they really step up and say, look, no matter what controversy this Solyndra matter has generated, government has a critical role to play in supporting innovation, and then they get very specific about what that role should be. So they say, first of all, private markets do not exist for certain benefits, such as providing for a strong military, improving public health, and protecting the environment. Private sector is not driven to deliver those public benefits. And then they say the private sector has tended systematically to underinvest in research and development relative to the potential benefits of research and development. And in line with those two recommendations, and those two observations, they recommend expanding ARPA-E, which is the agency in the Department of Energy modeled after DARPA, to fund breakthrough technology developments in clean energy. And they also recommend making more of the Department of Energy act like ARPA-E, with structural reforms both in the department and in the national laboratories. So that deals primarily with the research and development underinvestment question and the delivering of public goods that the private sector is not driven to. But they also focus on a market failure that goes to the very heart of the Solyndra controversy, the loan guarantee program, and entrepreneurial energy companies. And I'll give you their general statement and then spin that out a little bit for you. So they say, markets do not drive innovation especially well for investments that are lumpy, high cost, and high risk, particularly when the outcomes of these investments play out over decades in a context where energy prices are volatile. They then go on to discuss the Valley of Death. The Valley of Death is sort of an industry term for the following situation. Let's assume an entrepreneurial energy company has gotten, let's say, an A, maybe a B round of venture capital financing. They have developed their technology to the point that they can show that it works in a product lab setting. They may then have gotten a C and D round to demonstrate that that product can be manufactured or produced at a small scale, but one where they have figured out the basic mechanics of how do you replicate that product for market. They probably have put together customers in the marketplace that they can assert, if we could produce enough of these products and we sold them at this price, we would have these customers to buy. Then what happens? So they've gone through, let's say, maybe 4 rounds of venture capital. Now it is time to bring the product, the company, to commercial scale. That means building that first manufacturing plant, that first major production facility. And it turns out that in the energy field, when the commission talks about lumpy, high-cost projects, this is exactly the kind of thing they're talking about, where you need a minimum 100 million, probably upwards up to $500 million to build a plant and scale up to actually be a significant player in the marketplace. The question is, where do you get the money for doing that? And so the company comes to the brink of the valley of death. Can they get the financing to make that leap to the commercial scale? And it turns out that is incredibly problematic. Banks, well, let's start with equity. So the private equity firms and the venture capital firms, they've been funding this company up to this level now. They can't possibly and shouldn't provide equity to cover the cost of this manufacturing facility. Banks, on the other hand, are not willing to do it because here they're faced with an entrepreneurial company that has never scaled up to a commercial level before, and there are risks involved with that. And therefore, they may turn to the company and say, we're prepared to fund certainly your third plant, maybe your second, but not your first. And the company thus faces the valley of death. And the question is there any way that we can leverage the debt capital that's out there in a way that they will fund that first commercial facility? And what this commission calls for is we need to develop a first-of-a-kind technology commercial engine, a financial entity that addresses the valley of death problem. And it should have the following characteristics. They should say it should have a degree of independence, it should have private sector co-investment, strong public and private sector expertise, flexibility to offer financing products based on market gaps and where they're needed in order to really facilitate this marketplace for commercialization, adequate government and oversight, self-funding, an entity that does not have to go back to Congress every year and get an appropriation, a portfolio investment approach, an approach whereby it is assumed that some of the loan guarantees made by this entity will fail, but that the money lost in those ventures will be made up by other investments in the portfolio so that the portfolio itself is net positive. And transparency, so that the entity is accountable to the public. Well, they really do a very nice job of identifying this key problem for entrepreneurial energy companies, and then they really set out to define what this new entity should look like. And it turns out that the Senate Energy Committee, on a bipartisan basis, in a bill sponsored both by the chairman, Senator Bingaman, and by the ranking member, Senator Murkowski of Alaska, they have sent a bill to the Senate floor that creates the Clean Energy Deployment Administration. And it is no accident that that bill meets all of the design criteria that the council specifies. And in fact, the counsel strongly argues for its enactment. So we now have a bill that's been reported to the Senate floor. It is a very specific, well thought out, well structured approach to this valley of death problem, and could have a phenomenal impact in leveraging private sector dollars to address this need. So instead of spending $1.5 trillion directed by the government of China, which we will never do as a government structure, what it does is it provides the opportunity to take our significant private capital markets and put them to work in this clean energy space. So this is good news, right? Now the question is, can we in fact enact something like this? And that gets me to the second part of my talk, which is the political climate in Washington. Okay, and there are, you know, as a matter of civics, that we have a divided government. That is, we have a Democratic president, a Democratic majority in the Senate, and a Republican majority in the House. But it's also become a gridlocked government. And let me explain why. The House, which, as you know, has rules such that the majority can direct the timing, the agenda, what bills come to the floor, which bills don't come to the floor, and which votes are taken, can pass any bills it wants, pretty much without consulting the minority. And so what the House has done is that it has passed numerous bills, including energy bills, mostly fossil fuel directed, and sent them to the Senate, where they are immediately dead on arrival because the Democratic Senate disagrees profoundly with the thrust of the bills. So we have the House pumping out bills that the Senate will not consider. On the Senate side, which has very different rules, and where we have, as you know, a filibuster rule in effect, that is, because of arcane Senate rules that go back hundreds of years, individual senators can block consideration of bills by filibustering them. And the only way you break the filibuster is that you get 60 senators to vote to end debate on a bill. This is the problem we've got now. The Republicans have decided that they are essentially filibustering every bill that is proposed in the Senate. So when you look at the Senate record for the last year, we've really passed almost nothing other than absolutely must pass, we need money for the government kind of bills. So let me give you sort of a measure of this. So as of September 15th, this Congress has enacted into law 30 bills, okay? Of those 30 bills, 21 were naming public buildings, appointing members to the Smithsonian Board of Governors, extending a program for 2-3 weeks until they can figure out what the heck to do with it. And that leaves 9 bills that have had any substance to it. The 9 have been mostly funding bills, like continuing resolutions to keep us going until we pass an appropriations bill, the debt ceiling bill, those kinds of things. And we've actually only passed 2 substantive bills into law. One is an FAA authorization bill. This is just a reauthorization of the Federal Aviation Administration. And we did pass a patent reform bill. That's it. Now, let me give you a little perspective on that. So in the last Congress, when the minority also filibustered bills, by this time we had passed 64 bills into law. And then let's compare with the 80th Congress. In the 80th Congress, by this time, we had passed 242 laws, public laws. And the reason I cite the 80th Congress is that was the do-nothing Congress of 1947 and 48 that Harry Truman ran against in 1948. So we are essentially dead in our tracks. I mean, nothing has happened. And so the problem is not just this gridlock in the Congress. I think the political problem is worse than that. We have a partisanship and ideological divide that is gigantic. In fact, I would argue that the two parties now reside in two parallel universes. They have completely different views of the role of government. They have completely different goals. And they even have different sets of facts. Let's just sort of take those apart for a second. So the view of government. Well, the Republican view of government right now is that government is the problem. Government is the problem. So if that is your analysis of the situation, what you do is you try to cut funding for it. You try to strip it of regulatory powers. And you try to essentially neuter it as an entity because anything it does will cause problems. The Democratic view is that government is at least part of the solution to problems, and that what we need to do is figure out what is the proper government role, but it needs to be a positive role to solve problems. You can see how big a difference that is. And I'd just like to point out historically that that has not always been the case. So, for example, right now, the Republicans have railed against cap and trade as a cap and tax bill. It's government regulation gone bonkers. We had to stop it. Well, very few people remember that cap and trade was a Republican proposal, a Republican idea in days long gone by. The health care bill that the Democrats passed in the last Congress, of course, was Romney Care, right, for the nation. And that was essentially a Republican proposal. So what we have is we have seen movement within the parties such that they are now not talking about the same role for government, the same problem that they're trying to solve. So what about their goals? What do the two parties do with their goals? Well, the Republican goal right now, because government is a problem, it's not to govern successfully, it is to win electoral success. So it is absolutely true that Mitch McConnell, who's the majority leader, said that his first priority, policy and political priority, is to defeat Barack Obama in 2012. That is his goal. So, and if you think about it in that context, when you decide you're going to filibuster every bill, the reason you're doing that is to deny the president that you're trying to defeat any kind of credit for accomplishing anything and moving the dial at all on any of the issues that confront the country. The Democrats, on the other hand, are trying to figure out how do they govern this thing. How do they make a contribution to sort of at least seeing government as some legitimate contributor to the solving of problems? But again, that divide is gigantic. And then the different facts thing. I can't tell you of the countless examples of where Republicans will assert facts, Democrats will assert facts. They are night and day the opposite. Those are amplified by within the parallel universe by media systems that just repeat for the two sides what the facts are, and that again, if you can't agree on what the facts are, you can't define what the problem is, it is very hard to see how you move forward together to solve that problem. There are countless examples of this. I mean, if you look at the speeches that the President and Speaker Boehner made on the economy, it is like they are talking about two different economies in two different places of the world with completely different sets of problems. And each will assert that their facts are support them on that. Now, I am not one of those who's going to stand up in front of you and tell you a pox on both your houses, you're both to blame. I just don't believe that. Turns out, it's got to be true that one set of facts are more right than the other set of facts, right? They're facts, and there's evidence, and we got science, and let's figure it out. So don't misunderstand me there. Well, if we have this kind of political environment, which I know I haven't painted a particularly rosy picture, how do we get anything done? And let me talk specifically about, go back to this Clean Energy Deployment Administration idea and energy in particular. So it turns out that the House has passed a bunch of fossil fuel bills, and they're sort of sitting at the Senate door. In the Senate, Bingaman and Murkowski, as chairman and ranking member of the Energy Committee, have passed 14 bills out of their committee, including the CETA bill, on bipartisan votes, okay? And why were they able to do that? Because generally speaking, that was sort of under the political radar. No one was paying attention. These bills are generally not very sexy. They have to do with energy efficiency and hydropower and modular nuclear and a bunch of other things. And it's just hard to, you know, say that the freedom of the republic is going to be destroyed by any of them. So they've been very much under the radar. The question now is, can they go to the Senate floor with a package of these bills and convince Senator Reid and Senator McConnell that, you know, while we're waiting around for the next big fight here, what if we brought these bills to the floor? They're boring, they're humdrum, they're technical, they'll help improve the energy environment a little bit, you know, and basically try to keep it under the political radar so that it doesn't become the political football, the ideological playing ground for all of these trends that I just highlighted. And under that scenario, let's say, so McConnell would agree not to filibuster the bill. Okay, that would be the key thing. If he decided not to and they just sort of kept this down as a sort of a humdrum bill that they would go to over a week or two period, allow amendments, just see what happened. Then let's say the Senate would pass the bill, which it would pass the bill if it wasn't filibustered, because you know there are a minimum of 53 Democratic votes, and a bunch of Republicans would vote for it too. Then you would have passed the bill out of the Senate that could be conferenced with the House bills on fossil energy. So the deal would basically be, look, members of the House and Republicans, you want these fossil fuel policies in place. We can't, Democrats speaking, we can't accept all of them. Some of them are just too far. But we'll accept some pieces of it. We'll go with that if you take the bulk of what we passed out of the Senate. And the value proposition for you is you get to say, you know, we've been fighting for energy independence through more drilling, and we've done that, and we've passed this bill, and this is a major accomplishment for us, and blah, blah, blah. And of course, we'll do the same thing. That's a workable deal in Washington. That's possible. Now, I use the word possible and not probable for a host of reasons. First of all, keeping this under the political radar in the Senate, that is a tough order. Someone is going to offer some amendment that may elevate this thing to the ideological battlefield. That's probable. Will McConnell agree not to filibuster? The problem there is that if the strategy is to deny the president any accomplishments, then allowing an energy bill go through that in fact might be conferenced with the House that then the president would sign, and he takes credit for an energy bill, maybe I want to stop that right now. So that reduces the probability too. And then of course you have all the difficulties of actually conferring with the House and getting this all done. So in this Congress, it is probably a slim prospect, but not entirely out of the question. So as Stuart told you, Bingaman is my former boss. He is a legislator above all. I think right now he is looking for what's the right time to sort of pop the question to McConnell and Reid, make sure that Murkowski's on board, and he may find a window here where he thinks he can go for it. But, and he probably will go for it, but when that window appears is not entirely clear. There's another reason why the CETA bill in particular is hard. One is that even though we've assembled a very broad coalition of investors, venture capitalists, startup companies, the Chamber of Commerce, which is a major Republican organization, think tanks, that kind of thing. CETA is, if CETA comes to the light of day, it will be opposed by two groups. It'll be deposed by the conservative think tanks within the Republican parallel universe, because this is government doing anything in this space. And it will be opposed, ironically, by most environmental groups. Why? Because it is possible, given the scope, the breadth of the scope of the charge of CETA, that they might provide loans or loan guarantees to, let's say, nuclear or other dirty energy sources by the environmentalists counting. So we're in this particularly strange thing where we have this entire political gridlock problem to navigate, and then we have the right-wing think tank thing. That's understandable. That's probably beatable. But to have environmentalists show up at the doorstep of senators saying you shouldn't vote for this thing is a difficult thing. So we're still working on that, but it gives you a sense of the challenge that we face here. Okay, so where are we in the future of clean energy innovation? Well, I'm going to go back to the Pandora's box myth. It turns out that one thing didn't escape from Pandora's box. All the evils left, but at the bottom of the box was hope, believe it or not. That's really in the myth. Some of the retellings of the myth say that hope got out too, and we can all jump for joy. But I'm basically, I was telling some people this morning, I just can't get over my optimism. I just can't, just won't. So there's some hope. Let me tell you how that hope might play out. So I've given you one possible, not probable, but if it happened, hopeful scenario that this Congress would actually pass an energy bill that included some of these significant provisions that would actually move energy innovation. But in the longer term, let's say it's not in this Congress, there are two forces at work that I think are so powerful that at some point, and I don't know how soon, they will force the American government, including the Congress, to come to terms. And that is, number one, the international economic imperative of this huge global market for clean energy that is going to transform energy in the world in the 21st century. The notion that the United States is just going to let everybody else in the world play in that and we're not seems to be an unsustainable proposition, ultimately. And there will be, secondly, the increasing certainty of climate change. And that, too, notwithstanding the protestations of many in the House of Representatives, that will become increasingly more significant and important, and I think policymakers will have to face it. So that one day, instead of cutting clean energy investments to pay for disasters, we'll actually invest in clean energy investments to avoid disasters. And with that, I'll take your questions.
Hi, thank you for such an interesting talk. My name is Sam Buell. I'm a first-year SOM student. This idea that you've posited about kind of a bank or entity to help support lending is pretty interesting. What's your thought on why it needs to be held within the government? Couldn't it be a for-profit social enterprise or even a foundation that was supporting these
Right.
loans?
The proposal essentially would initially fund CETA would be initially funded by an appropriation by the government of $10 billion, okay? And there would be an initial appropriation, and then that would be it. And then the entity would be allowed to charge fees, make money, returns on investment, that kind of thing, to continue to fund its work from then on out. So if you're going to appropriate any public dollars for such an entity, it has to be under the accountability systems of the government. And what the proposal is to make this entity as independent as you can make it. So the bill that is now on the Senate floor provides for an entity that has its own board of directors, its own CEO, appointed by the president but confirmed by the Senate. It can hire financial professionals outside of the government hiring system. It can pay them outside of the government pay scales. And the only connection it has to the Department of Energy is that the Secretary of Energy is mandated to provide a technology strategy for CETA. And actually the one good thing that the Energy Department and its national laboratories can do is to think seriously about what technologies are likely to be the game changers in terms of cost and effectiveness in energy over the next 10 to 20 years. So to me, it's really an excellent compromise between the need to make it as much a non-governmental entity as you can, but recognizing that it still has to account for itself by virtue of the federal funding that's there. Does that answer that question?
Well, I mean, I see advantages to the government aspects, but in the environment that you describe, where essentially it's probably dead on arrival and not going to get anywhere, it seems like it could be very successfully operated and privately, assuming you could get the technical expertise and then that pool of equity capital. Right. To begin your lending.
Right, and
you would avoid all of the conflict.
So from that's an intriguing idea. From my former boss's perspective, he would be thrilled if basically someone took his bill, made it a charter for a nonprofit, and found $10 billion somewhere. That would be like ideal. That I don't mean to say that's not possible, and he's not. He just knows that, his job as a legislator, and he might be able to convince the Congress to take this $10 billion and put it aside for this, and so he's going to try to do it. If someone can do it on a private basis in a nonprofit setting and achieve the same results, he'd be absolutely thrilled, and we all would be. Bill Gates is on the commission. He didn't quite step up to do that yet. But keep your cards and letters coming to him.
Thank you for your comments. My name is Raphael. I'm a joint degree student between here and FES. My question is, one of the concerns that that people have about the Green Bank is that, of course, you're trying to lower the cost of financing to stimulate some of these projects, but what we're really trying to do is to sort of make up for the fact that we're not pricing an externality that's operationally there, like we don't have a price for carbon. Do you think that it'll really be substantially helpful to try to do through financing what we couldn't do through pricing carbon? And are our efforts better spent sort of trying to convince the American people to put a price on carbon? Thank you.
Well, putting a price on carbon is actually from a government standpoint, the cheapest and most effective way to move the clean energy economy in the United States. It requires no federal money, and and basically it tells the private sector, organize yourselves around this price and make all the choices that you need to make. We should continue to urge the American people to support that. I don't think it solves the problem that CETA is designed to solve, because even if you have a price for carbon, the issue is, if you think about this entrepreneurial company that is trying to get financing for that first commercial plant, and you think about debt, which is what you need, at least in our current debt sector, I think it is a legitimate thing for debt providers to say, look, this company has never done this before. It has never scaled up a plant, okay? And there are so many risks involved with that. I can't price my equity high enough to, I mean, my debt high enough, it becomes a kind of equity play. And I'm not in the equity play business. I'm in debt. And I think with breakthrough technologies, with new entrepreneurial companies, there's no way around that problem unless someone steps in and says, we'll reduce the risk, Mr. Debt Provider, of doing this. And this is how we're going to do it. So it's the green, CETA is a very specific thing from the Green Bank. We actually had two different proposals floating in Congress. One was a green bank that really was more designed to buy down the price of investment in clean energy, buy down the interest rate, essentially. CETA is not that much. CETA is really focused on how do you get breakthrough technologies to that first commercial scale plant. And that problem, I think, you need something like CETA to do, no matter what the pricing environment you have out there, I think.
You know, the tricky part about that you know, that we were seeing, and I was in DC working on issues that dealt with CETA, was that, I mean, basically, risk is sort of like energy. It's neither creating nor destroying when we talk about financing. Someone's really absorbing the risk.
Yeah.
They're not really reducing it. So, of course,
No, the government, the taxpayer, would be absorbing the risk.
exactly. So basically, it's still, you know, it's not necessarily, I mean, you still have losses that result from it. That's the only, I think.
Right, and that's why it's very explicit that this is a portfolio strategy. You are allowed to make not bad decisions, but you're allowed to lose on a few of the bets you take. And you are allowed to make investments on things which are much more safe and much more secure in order to ensure that you have a return that's going to make up for that loss. And of course, that's what most successful venture capital firms do, you know, in the equity space, as you know. I mean, they make 10 investments, maybe one hits big, 2, 3, 4 are okay, and the rest are losers, right? And they make a lot of money.
So for thinking about what the response is to environmentalist concerns about what other technologies CETA would support, what's the response? What's the logic that
Yeah.
comes to mind?
Well, part of it is a political response. That is, one of the reasons the CETA bill is a bipartisan bill is that its authority is broad across technologies, and that's particularly important in this environment. Probably will be for the foreseeable future. But the other answer is, you see, if and you have to forgive me a little bit. I'm sort of fighting for this pretty hard every day, so I've got a few bruises here. But so the way I view these environmental groups' position is that it's much better to have no money going to anybody than to have some money go to people we don't like. That makes no sense to me. You know, but that's the end result. If you oppose CETA and you don't get it enacted, that means zero money will be going to this valley of death for clean energy entrepreneurial companies, and zero money will be going to nuclear, and you will feel good, we'll feel pure. We won't have funded a nuclear plant we didn't want to fund, but we also got no money to the clean energy economy. Meanwhile, China's investing $1.5 trillion. I mean, the fact of the matter is that given the charter of CETA, the great majority, a huge majority of the money is going to go to very clean energy stuff. Some small portion of it may go to not our favorite energy sources.
So that's sort of like saying there'll be a pie to split up versus no pie. But is there anything in terms of what modeling and what we might expect would happen with these investments? So what investments might go, or what dollars might go towards backing solutions that environmentalists favor versus those that they don't favor?
Modeling, that's a really good question. It's, that really depends on the decisions that CETA would make, right? And it's the other dilemma you have. You either, in legislation, you either are very restrictive and say, you shall do this, but you shall not do that, or you give great flexibility to the administrator with a set of goals and objectives and that they're going to be measured against. But we're going to let you decide what's appropriate in a particular circumstance. When you do the latter, you're always subject to, how do you model that? What are they going to do? And one of the other problems we face is people say, well, what if, Perry's elected president and you have CETA in place? What will happen then? I say, well, I don't know. The point is, don't elect Perry. I mean, that's the answer. I mean, trying to design legislation to be foolproof against the political future of the country just doesn't make any sense. What you do is you've got to set up an institution, give it some independence, give it its charter, check in, make sure that it's doing what it's doing. But we as citizens have to take a little risk that it's going to be administered properly in accordance with the intention of the founders, and it is a risk we take. But it's a risk well worth taking. And if we don't take it, we can model exactly what will happen, which will be Zippo.
Hi, thank you for your talk. My name is Jen. I'm a fifth-year PhD student in the forestry school, and I have a slightly different question than what's been asked before. So the Solyndra case has already been quite an arrow in the quiver of the Republican candidates in the debate so far. How would you advise the Obama campaign to counter that, and what do you expect their strategy to be on energy policy within the 2012 campaign?
How would I advise the campaign with respect to Solyndra? Or?
Yeah, with respect to Solyndra and the lack of activity on energy policy in general in the 4 years of the Obama administration so far.
Right. That's a very good question. So one of the issues in Washington, this is so Washington. The question is, so how long does this Solyndra thing play out? How many more hearings can they have? What kind of hooks do they have? Is this going to be like old news by November 15th? And so there's a big fight in Washington about, whether this is just we have a little sort of blow up and there'll be a lot of scurrying and then it'll die down. So I think probably, the president right now and the campaign, it's the president, is to his credit, from my standpoint, keeping focused on a particular message right now. And he's, as you know, when he did his jobs speech and he did his deficit speech, the word energy did not pass his lips. He's very focused on those issues. He probably should stay on that. Watch to see what does this Solyndra thing have legs beyond that. At some point, he's going to have to confront so what are you doing about the energy situation? And, I'm not sure what his answer is. I mean, he can go you know, he hasn't, beyond cap and trade, which he was a champion for Waxman Markey, he hasn't sent, I mean, he has energy proposals that are significant, so we can talk about those and say they weren't enacted by the Congress, that kind of thing. But it looks as though when you survey the issues, the topics that are of most interest to the American people right now, especially with gas prices not quite going through the roof anymore, energy drops pretty low. So I suspect he won't address it in big terms for at least the foreseeable future. If this possible but improbable path I identified plays out, and we actually pass a bill in the Senate, I think he'll say, okay, let's get something out of the, you know, let's get the House and Senate together to confer and let's get a bill. But that'll give him the opportunity to do it. But if that doesn't happen, I don't see his picking that up on his own. Okay? Great.
Thank you to Patrick for being the first speaker of the Sabin Environmental Venture Prize Speaker Series. Our next speaker will be on November 3rd. Miles Lassiter, the founder of Hire One here in New Haven, will be talking about the venture and how he created it. Once again, a big round of applause for Patrick. Thank you.